Hi, I'm the Sea Fellow. Welcome to the channel. This is my first video. It's a review for a game called The Drifter. It's a retro-style point-and-click adventure game made by a small Australian independent studio called Powerhoof, consisting of just 2 developers. I love point-and-click adventure games, and this game is very highly reviewed on Steam, so I was excited to play it and give it my first review for the channel. I'm going to start by telling you what I thought of the game without getting into the story at all, just so that we can be completely spoiler-free at the start. I'll let you know before I get into the synopsis, which will be full of spoilers, and then I'll get into the review with the added context of the synopsis. This is actually the 4th script I wrote for the game. Why? Well, it's complicated. The first couple drafts I wrote without finishing the game, honestly, because I didn't want to. I forced myself to finish it because this is not a review channel, but a synopsis channel too. And while it's debatable whether you should need to finish a game before you review it, you definitely need to finish it before you give a synopsis. I was writing out all my criticisms for the game, but I realized I couldn't really articulate them as well as I wanted to because I was hazy on the details of what was a fairly complicated story at times. There are times in the story when we catch glimpses of late game characters in the beginning, and I knew that in order to give the best review and synopsis I could, I needed to be able to recontextualize moments like that, and see the game from the perspective of having already played it, making sure that the direction of the story stayed consistent the whole way through. I really wanted to be able to back up my criticisms without questioning whether they came from a lack of understanding, or if they did come from a lack of understanding, was that my fault, or were the explanations unclear? So I played through the game a second time in order to write a 4th script and make sure my criticisms were fair. My first playthrough took around 11 hours, my second took around 3 or 4. So before I get into the details, I'm giving this game a 6. There are plenty of things to like about this game, but given that its main focus is on narrative, and that its narrative is by far the weakest part of the game, its flaws kind of outweigh its strengths. The story started out really strong, and it wasn't until about halfway through that it really started to go sideways. This is why I can give the game a passing grade. But ultimately, a good start cannot save a bad story. Sprinting at the start of a marathon isn't how you win. The Drifter tries very hard to be an action game, which is quite ambitious for a point-and-click adventure. And at times, it really does succeed. There were times when this game had my heart pounding. The problem is that it does so at the expense of story and genre. It starts out as a grounded and gritty murder mystery story with conspiracy undertones, and slowly morphs into sci-fi slop that forces you to suspend your disbelief and ignore plot holes more and more with each chapter. Some of the action sequences are undeniably cool, and the game does its best to work within the genre to make them not feel out of place, and probably pulls it off better than most studios could hope to. But ultimately, they quickly start to feel forced, and they actually muddle and pull the story in a direction that undermines all the elements that draw you in at the start. Despite how cool some of the action-packed moments can be, they are gratuitous. The game shines brightest when it just sticks to the bare-bones investigatory feel that is more present in the early chapters, without all the haphazardly explained supernatural stuff introduced later. The Drifter wants to be smart and profound and chock full of twists and surprises, but it ends up just dissolving into pretentious, incoherent drivel with some truly stupid moments. There are also several times where it cuts to a black screen and the player character describes a bunch of fast-paced events unfolding. Clearly, this is a case of the devs not having time or resources to animate the whole sequence. This didn't bother me at first, but it became harder to ignore in the late game as the scenes described became greater in scale. Again, this wouldn't have been a problem if they hadn't insisted on taking the story in the direction they chose to take it, and just had the story fit the minimalistic gameplay instead. The game has beautiful pixel art, incredible voice acting, a clean UI, interesting gameplay mechanics, puzzles that test your logical thinking, a solid soundtrack, and well-written characters that offer unique perspectives. Everything gameplay-wise does well to serve the fact that this is a story-focused game, but the story does not serve the fact that this game is a classic-style point-and-click adventure game. The dialogue, to be clear, has exceptionally good writing, but the story just progressively crawls further and further up its own ass. For a story that goes so far off the rails, the gameplay is very on the rails, even for the genre. The game doesn't overwhelm you with choices. Every chapter you're in a fairly contained map, and any object in the world that is not part of the way forward will present a gray X when you hover the mouse over it. The game will give you hints about what to do next in the forms of character dialogue, or the player character offering little insights when you try something that is close but no cigar to what you needed to do. There is also a convenient menu beside the inventory menu that keeps track of all the various threads of the story, and helps you remember things like where you found a lead or what you should be investigating. The simplistic UI does have some downsides though. One is the notification system. Anytime a lead you are following has an update, you get a little notification, and the only way to make it go away is to hover the mouse over the item in the menu for a few seconds. There is no way to turn off notifications, and it can get pretty annoying and distracting. Another problem is the lack of options to interact with anyone or anything on a certain topic more than once. When you pick up an item, you will get some notification about it, but there is no way to repeat the same interaction. For a few items that offer specific insights, this can be frustrating as it seems to arbitrarily punish you for zoning out. Similarly, in conversations with people, once you have selected a certain topic, you cannot select it a second time to have them repeat themselves. The topic becomes grayed out. When you hover over it, it gives a summary of what was discussed, but it's not as comprehensive as the dialogue itself. In a game that is so heavily focused on story and relies on item and character interactions to tell the story, the lack of ability to repeat the information feels like a huge misstep. There are very limited interactivity options. Just a left click on things in the world, using an item in your inventory on items in the world, or combining two items in your inventory to make a third item. I don't see this as a huge problem, as it's well suited to the game's linearity. I can see it having a lot more mainstream appeal than other games in the genre, while also potentially losing some appeal to hardcore fans of the genre for the same reasons. Regardless of what style you prefer, the game is very refined and deliberate, which I think most people will appreciate. You will often get some unique dialogue for what you try, even if it's wrong. More so than a generic "I can't reach it," or a similar response you'd expect in games like this. Some adventure games are obtusely unintuitive, and that's part of their charm. This is not the case with the Drifter. Most of the puzzles are logically straightforward, and some of the inventory items are like tools in a tool belt, utilized multiple times in different situations. Although the game does require a bit of thinking outside the box, it usually does a pretty good job of nudging you in the right direction in those cases. The protagonist also narrates his actions and what's going on at times, which fits the general vibe. I'm going to talk a bit about the protagonist and his situation, and then I'm going to get into the synopsis, so this is your spoiler warning. You play as Mick Carter, a drifter. What does that mean exactly? Well, all we know at the start is that he's someone who does not stay in one place or keep the same job for long. And we learn more about him, his situation, and his motives throughout the game. Mick is an interesting character. It's not often you play a game as a character so looked down on by others, but he's good at standing up for himself, and he has the conviction to put them in their place when they do so. And it was cool to see his unique perspective. He's smart, resourceful, and a genuinely likable guy, which makes you really empathize with him for his situation. There's a part where a groundskeeper aims a leaf blower at him to shoo him away, and later, you get a hold of the leaf blower, and when you try to aim it at someone, Mick says, "The groundskeeper might use it like that, but I won't." This perfectly exemplifies how he's wise and more classy than most people. In the opening scene, Mick wakes up in a pile of sacks in a freight car. When we examine the bed, Mick says he's been living rough long enough to have gotten a good sleep on it. There's another destitute man asleep in the same car as us. When we can't get the door open to get off the train, we try and wake him. This turns out to be a mistake, as he's a paranoid maniac who starts ranting about being chased down while getting ready to hit us with a crowbar. We throw a tarp on top of him and manage to take his crowbar, which we use to pry the freight car door open. Floodlights shine into the car. Mick assumes he's being busted by the cops and steps to the side, out of view. The man gets the tarp off him and steps right into the light, disoriented. He says something about how Mick led them right to us before being gunned down, causing Mick to wonder if the man really was a paranoid lunatic or if he was onto something. Cops wouldn't just murder someone for freight hopping. We manage to escape through a vent at the top of the train, and Mick jumps off the side, falling off a bridge, but at least escaping the immediate danger. Mick comes to and his phone is ringing. It's his sister Annie. We find out that he's back in his hometown for his mother's funeral. Mick has a suit in his bag and is arranging to spend the night at his sister's house so they can go together tomorrow. But she has moved and he doesn't know her address. His phone battery dies before she can give it to him. Mick runs into a guy named Bill who he's known since he was a kid. They met at a homeless shelter that someone named Sarah used to manage. Mick says that's where he met Sarah. So we learn that Mick has had it pretty rough ever since he was a kid. We also learn that as of late, the people at the shelter had started acting crazy, which put Sarah in some dangerous situations and ultimately led her to have to close the place down, and led Bill to start hanging out under this bridge instead. He also tells us about a conspiracy that homeless people are being abducted by monsters with glowing eyes called the Mulinji. He has been sleeping in an old abandoned car. He gives us the keys to see if we can use it to charge the phone battery. While looking for a way to get the car started, we meet a reporter named Grace, who is investigating the disappearance of local homeless population for her newspaper, The Herald. Mick has an aversion to the word homeless and resents her ignorant questions, but he needs to borrow her knife to cut a tube out of the washing machine in the hopes of helping get the car started. So he tells her everything Bill told him and sends her to go talk to him. When we return to the car, both of them are being abducted by the same men who shot at Mick. They are dressed in black and wearing green night vision goggles and carrying rifles. They appear to be some kind of special ops. When Mick tries to intervene, he too is abducted, tied up, and thrown in the reservoir, where he drowns. To his surprise, he is brought back to life and given another chance to escape. This time, he remembers to conserve his breath and manages to use Grace's knife to free himself from the ropes and swim to the surface. The men are still in the area, so he hides under the bridge. He finds a stashed bottle of booze, which he takes a swig from to stave off the hypothermia. This is where his son Alec appears, seemingly out of nowhere, and leads him to the entrance of a sewer where he finds Bill's Zippo lighter. He uses it to start a fire in a barrel to warm up, then explores the sewer entrance some more to find it blocked by Bill's body. Grace's business card is tucked in his pocket with a phone number written on it, and a cassette tape is hidden in the pocket lining. He uses the knife to cut the tape out, only for a man in a yellow jacket to appear and point a gun at him. The man won't tell him who he is until Mick drops the knife, but because the floodlights appear again behind him, Mick suspects that he is the leader of the Mulinji. He refuses to comply for fear of being killed again. He ducks behind a barrel and makes a Molotov cocktail, which he throws at the man to make a distraction and escape through the sewer system and into town. In town, a man with a gray beard buys a newspaper and puts some change into a homeless man's hat, then checks his stopwatch before exiting the scene. The homeless man is asleep, so we borrow the change dropped and use it to buy a newspaper of our own. To our surprise, Mick is on the cover, standing over Bill's body with a knife in his hand. He is being framed for the murder. It's also the day of funeral, so a day has gone by that he can't account for. The recent events must have done a number on his psyche. At least he's able to look up where the funeral is in the obituaries. Mick visits the Herald office building where Grace works. The sassy receptionist acknowledged that Grace is missing, but given that Mick has just crawled through the sewer and is in a sorry state even by his own standards, she doesn't take him seriously and dismisses everything he says. He does, however, see a suspicious man in a bucket hat climbing the back of the building. When Mick tries to go to the funeral home to meet his sister, the groundskeeper shoos him off with a leaf blower and threatens to call the cops. Through a mix of detective work, crime, and removing graffiti with refined alcohol, Mick manages to figure out where the plot for the grave is, and he decides to meet his sister there instead. On his way, Mick sees Alec's grave and collapses on it in a state of confusion and sorrow. Sarah, who we learn is Mick's wife, or ex-wife, chastises him for his state of smelling like piss, shit, and booze. During the funeral procession, the man in the yellow jacket creeps up behind Mick and covertly sticks his gun into his back and tells him to come quietly. Mick hands the urn with his mother ashes off to Annie, and she hits him over the head with it, knocking him out. Mick manages to escape and wants to skip town, but the cops are hot on his trail. A vision of his dead son appears again and shows him a hidden entrance to an underground tomb where they both hide. A humanoid monster with sword-like arms and the same night vision goggles as the special ops follows them into the tomb while they are looking for a way out. Mick sees it and realizes that the Mulinji are real after all. He manages to trick it into collapsing a section of the roof in on itself. He hears more people coming down and hides inside of a coffin, but then the entire roof caves in and he is buried alive. Mick wakes up in the hospital, and the man with the gray beard observes him as he is waking up and checks his stopwatch again. Then the man in the yellow jacket appears beside a cop. As it turns out, the man is not with the Mulinji, but he's actually a detective, and he genuinely believes Mick killed Bill. The man introduces himself as Detective Hara. A nurse comes in to change Mick's IV while they are talking, and we discover that she is poisoning us. If we take the IV out, the nurse tries to suffocate us with a pillow. Mick presses the bedside help button, and Hara comes in to see the nurse trying to suffocate him. His cop partner shows up from behind and pistol whips him. Mick is able to take a syringe from the nurse, fill it with the poison from the IV, and jab the cop with it. Hara wakes up, realizes that the nurse and his partner were both in on the plot to murder Mick, and decides not only to let Mick go, but to help him figure out what's going on. Mick heads back to Annie's place and Sarah is there too. Annie has been abducted, and Mick resolves to rescue her. He plays the tape from Bill's jacket, using Annie's old answering machine, and hears a cryptic message from someone named Dr. Roth, who appears to be anticipating or even plotting Mick's movements. Mick calls the number on the card Grace left in Bill's pocket, and a woman named Dr. Nazari answers the phone, but isn't keen to answer your questions or tell you where she's located. You meet with Hara back at the bridge, and there's a barrel that wasn't there before, with a sticker on it that says Trinity Biotech. Hara uses his detective resources to locate Dr. Nazari's office, and you head there. She refuses to address you, but is caught off guard when you confront her with the sticker. She is further alarmed when you bring up Dr. Roth. She dodges most of your questions, but she does tell you that Trinity Biotech does research in the field of science called quantum cognition. She gives you a pen with her business name and ID on it and calls security to have you escorted out. You learn from the secretary at the Herald that she is an aspiring author, and you have Sarah call her pretending to be a publisher and feigning interest in her book, which coaxes her out of the building long enough for you to visit Grace's office. Her computer seems to be missing the boot drive and won't start, but her case notes are on the desk, and among them you find a list of payments Trinity Biotech has made with other companies. You cross-reference it with the business ID on Dr. Nazari's pen, and you learn that Trinity Biotech has been sending Nazari a lot of money. When you confront her on this, she admits that she's been taking hush money for quietly providing them patients for clinical trials. The patients just happen to be destitute homeless people. She admits that Dr. Roth is the founder of Trinity Biotech along with Maxwell Holden, but they didn't like each other much. Hara is again able to use his detective resources to help us by locating Annie's car. We find the missing boot drive of Grace's computer in it. We use it to start Grace's computer and access her contacts, where we find Maxwell Holden's address, which is right where Annie's car was parked. On our way out, Grace's phone rings. It's the receptionist, and she's pissed. She says the cops are on their way, but we can hear through the phone line that they aren't cops. The Malingi are back on our trail. We close the door and barricade it with the filing cabinet, but they throw some kind of nest in the room and we are swarmed with murderous insects. We manage to escape out the window, but there are special ops waiting below. We try to get to the roof and they follow us up through the building. And the Malingi are waiting for us at the top too, so we fall to the bottom and manage to land in the dumpster to break our fall. We head back to Maxwell Holden's address and discover his hideout and break in. I want to take a quick intermission and talk about my impressions of the game up to this point. I was really enjoying the game, but that's mainly because up till now there were a lot of mystery boxes opened, but not a lot of attempts at answers yet. There's been quite a bit of action so far. Getting thrown into the reservoir is one of my favorite sections of the whole game. It's the first time Mick dies, and he doesn't know if he's imagining it, and it's unsettling. You really don't have time to wonder what happened, as you're still drowning. You have to cut the rope, but he's running out of air. The only items he has are a tube and a gas canister that were meant for the car, but you can use them to get a bit more oxygen so that you can cut through the rope. It's a cool little puzzle. And then you have the scene where Hara is pointing the gun at you. You can try to charge him or just flee from him, but both result in you dying and having to restart. So far, the implementation of death in this game is much less annoying than when it happens in other point-and-click games, like say King's Quest for instance. The problem though, is that it makes no sense why Hara wouldn't tell Mick he's a cop, or use any kind of police language to indicate that he is. Even when Mick asks, "Who are you?" he just says, "Drop the knife, then we'll talk." This is the first example of them prioritizing high-stakes action over storytelling, and I consider it a legitimate plot hole. Even later at the funeral, he doesn't say you're under arrest, he just sticks his gun into your back. Then the next action sequence is your first encounter with the Malingi in the tomb. This is where it does start to get a bit annoying. The solution is pretty unintuitive, and it relies on you dying over and over and occasionally getting little hints from either Mick or Alec to help figure out what you're doing wrong. Another action scene is when you're climbing the roof. This was the first time I had to look something up. The game allows you to climb to a platform and there's no way of going back and nothing else to do other than fall to your death. This is because you're meant to grab a drain pipe before you reach the platform, and if you miss it, you're meant to die and start over. I was so used to games like this not allowing you to progress until you're meant to, so I kept getting to the platform, assuming it wouldn't have let me get there unless I was meant to. Anyway, that's a minor nitpick, but I think it was a bit unintuitive, and my experience in these games worked against me. The hospital is a cool scene, but I have another minor nitpick with it that I'll talk about in just a bit. So, while the action scenes were pretty positive overall, I think they're outshined by the non-action parts. In Chapter 4, you use all your resources like Hara's police network, Sarah's Googling skills, and Grace's case notes to find leads and cross-reference them in order to dig up dirt on Nazari and find Holden's hideout. That was by far my favorite part of the game. It felt like detective work, which is perfect for this genre, and the gameplay just fit the vibe that had been set up to this point. My favorite character was the receptionist at the Herald. You can ask her about a variety of things, but she just has a dismissive, sarcastic, quippy response for everything. Where the groundskeeper was just a straight up dick, the receptionist was equally rude and judgmental, but in a hilarious way. I wish the game had more comic relief moments like her. Unfortunately, in Chapter 5, when you get to Holden's hideout, the vibe really starts to change for the worse and progressively worsens more and more until the end. So you get to Holden's hideout and you find a sheet covering what seems to be a tied up and mutilated Malingi that Holden is doing research on, which is never really explained, just seems to be there for shock value. Holden catches you and knocks you out and ties you up to a radiator with some metal disc screwed on top of your head, which is connected to some kind of pulley system, which he uses to torture and kill you while explaining your ability to rewind back to before you were killed. He tells you that you have a rare genetic condition that prevents you from dying by anticipating the future during high-stress situations. So really, Mick isn't dying. He's just catching glimpses of things that could cause him to die and using precognition to avoid those outcomes, which we experience as rewinds that he calls a phase flip. Quantum cognition is the study of this phenomenon, and Holden goes on to explain that in a natural environment, someone with enhanced precognition like Mick may have never noticed it, or it may only have been triggered by something like a near-death experience here and there. But he seems to think that we're working with Dr. Roth, who has been exposing us to extremely high-stress situations continually in order to artificially strengthen our phase-flipping ability. I might be doing a poor job explaining it because from here on out, the explanations of everything seem to range from patchy and thrown together to straight up incoherent. And to touch back on the hospital scene, how would being discreetly poisoned trigger a high-stress response? It doesn't make any sense. Holden tells you that he's not actually a killer, that he's being framed by Dr. Roth for murder for all his subjects that he's abducted. He also explains that a side effect of phase flipping is decoherence of the temporal phase, which basically means you go crazy and start hallucinating. So this explains why Mick has been having visions of Alec, and why the people at the homeless shelter that Sarah ran were going crazy, since Nazari was secretly providing the local homeless populace as test subjects for Trinity Biotech. He plans to do an operation on you to rid you of this side effect, and takes off his bucket hat to show you his deflated looking head from doing it on himself. And it doesn't seem to have worked because he keeps addressing his desert pee, implying that he's hallucinating his lover beside him. When he leaves the room, you can talk to a cop in the other room through the vent system. Holden won't feed you till you tell him where Roth's facility is, which you don't know. The cop knows though, and he tells you that it's in the Great Winyara Desert. You figure out a signal system to have him distract Holden whenever you need him to, so that you can plan your escape. I won't go into too much detail on how you escape, but basically you manage to free your legs without Holden noticing. So when he uses the pulley to hoist you up, you kick him in the head and knock him out. You manage to free the cop, who takes out Holden when he chases you shortly after waking up. But it turns out that he's not a cop. He's one of Roth's special ops, and he kills you as well. So you face flip back and try again, this time taking out the cop too, which Holden witnesses and realizes you're not working with Roth. So he offers to work with you, which you reluctantly accept. So Holden realizes Roth's men are coming and decides he doesn't have time to do his operation on you. Then Hara shows up just as you're leaving. You all head to Annie's and Sarah helps you all by figuring out exactly where in the Great Winyara Desert Dr. Roth's facility is. They deduce that it's in an old nuclear power plant. Mick puts together that the old guy who got shot on the train at the beginning of the game was on the run from Trinity, so it must be next to a train line. They find the one nuclear power plant next to a train line, and the three men hop on a freight car to make their way there. Holden has a special device that he developed that zaps the security cameras, and you start using a metal detector to figure out how to get in. He also has a Geiger counter. You realize too late that there are active landmines around, just as Holden gets blown up by one, with the explosion causing a small crater that reveals a way to get in through the vents. You see that Dr. Roth is the man with the gray beard. You find Annie inside, who tells you she's not a hostage, but she's actually been working for Roth for the better part of a year. And Grace is not a hostage either. She's staying there to work on a story about Dr. Roth's life. Roth also has two other scientists working there with him in the facility full-time, Dr. Klein and Sanjay. Roth seems to have answers to all your questions. The attacking men, just acting the part. The monsters, just paranoid hallucinations. The bodies in the reservoir, just a trick. All part of a plan to get you to investigate and lead you back here. He tells us he is able to face flip further back in time than us because he has been doing it longer. He says he has essentially lived 1,000 lifetimes. This explains how he's been pulling the strings from the background, checking his pocket watch to make sure everything is lined up perfectly. He's essentially a time traveler. In fact, Mick himself was in on this plan. He has shown footage of himself working with Dr. Roth at this very facility before the events at the beginning of the game. Holden was torturing us because he thought we were working for Dr. Roth, and it turns out he was right all along. His whole facility harnesses the power of the nuclear reactor to enhance the phase flip ability through a supercomputer called the quantum coupler. He invites you to look around the facilities to find holes in his story. The quantum coupler utilizes the brainpower of two people to phase flip further into the past. It can also treat the side effects from decoherence of the temporal phase, like hallucinations, but Mick doesn't trust Dr. Roth enough to use it again. In one hallway, Mick finds a pipe leak exposes footprints leading to a secret door. We use fine ground coffee beans to cover the keypad and wait for someone to use it again. We manage to figure out the code and sneak in. We find a comatose woman on life support. We confront Roth about it, and he says that it's someone who fell ill while working here. So he's keeping her alive, and the secret room was just for her privacy. Mick accidentally knocks Annie off a railing while hallucinating, and she dies. Mick and Hara use the quantum coupler to phase flip back to before she died so that you can save her. Mick allows the quantum coupler to heal his temporal lobe to prevent more hallucinations. You steal Roth's keycard from his lab and snoop around his room. You find a photo of the three founders, Maxwell Holden, Gideon Roth, and his wife, Sophia Roth. You realize Sophia Roth is the comatose woman. You confront him about this, and he says that it was just an accident. His calm demeanor slips for a second as you accuse him of scheming. All of this has been a scheme to go back and prevent the accident. He denies it, but it's clear this is the case. You find Hara searching Roth's room. He's looking at a secret hatch in the bathroom. The two of you are able to bring down a gas mask. Hara realizes it's just a safety precaution for emergency protocols. You cut down the gas mask and find a battery in it, which you use for your Geiger counter. You realize the gas mask is a neural interface, just like the one in the quantum coupler that connects multiple users so they can phase flip. In the reactor room, the Geiger counter is off the charts, showing much higher levels of radiation than what's being displayed by the devices in the reactor. You realize Roth is in the process of triggering the lockdown so he can have everyone use the gas masks to unknowingly connect to the quantum coupler and power the ultimate phase flip to go back and prevent what happened to his wife. Knowing Roth's plan, Mick and Hara convince Annie to try and leave with them, but Roth has sabotaged any way out. The three of you come up with a plan. Annie and Hara go to get a program from Sanjay that will remove both of you and Dr. Roth's ability to phase flip. You need to install it into the quantum coupler before Roth's big ultimate phase flip. The lockdown triggers while you are in the reactor with Dr. Klein. With the elevator shut down, he opens another passage to the first floor where you can work against the chaotic environment to recover the program from Hara, but Roth shows up before you can upload it to the quantum coupler. This is where we learn that Mick was involved with Dr. Roth's plan from the start. The plan isn't just for Roth to go back and save Sophia. The plan is also for Mick to go back and save Alec. They were both consumed by guilt and grief and had the same MO, but since the original plan, Mick has learned he needs to accept the past. When you refuse to submit to Roth's phase flip and instead try to shoot him, he dodges the bullet. He is more powerful than you knew. He grows a third eye in his head, and his body and posture change into something beastly. He cripples you and forces you into the chair and goes to work. Mick sees him enter his passcode, Desert P. He puts it together that Sophia left Roth for Holden, that Roth put her in a coma out of rage, and wants to go back and prevent her from leaving him for Holden. Mick uses this new information to goad Roth into killing him, allowing him to phase flip. It brings him back to the beginning of the interaction, and this time Mick shoots himself instead of Roth, to go even further back. Mick uses the hazardous environment from the blown nuclear reaction to die over and over again until he's far back enough to give Klein Roth's password. He uses it to create an opportunity to distract Roth long enough to install the program on the quantum coupler. We successfully disabled their ability to phase flip anymore. Roth is furious and sends Mick down into the pit of the nuclear reactor, where we see he is harvesting Malinji monsters that chase Mick. Mick makes his way back to the upper floors with everyone, and we're planning to escape, but Roth has emptied our gas canister. We need to fill it back in the reactor. Sanjay overrides the elevators and we make our way back down. Sanjay and a Malinji kill each other. We take Sanjay's card and escape up a vent into the hallway where his room is. Using his keycard to enter, we find a plant watering gun. We fill it with gasoline, and using the flames in the blown reactor, we light a rag on fire and stuff it into the gun's nozzle, creating a makeshift flamethrower, which we use to take out the Malinji. In Sophia's room, we see that she has been hooked up to one of the gas masks. We free her from it and she goes unconscious. We revive her and bring her back up to the top floor with us. We are just making our escape on the platform rising to the desert surface when Dr. Roth appears in his monstrous form and coated in the same vicious insects from earlier. There is a big final boss sequence where we toss Hara Holden's electromagnetic pulse gun that we use to disable the security cameras and get him to distract Roth. Roth grabs the gun and is pointing it at Hara when Mick goads him into shooting him with the pulse gun. It shocks Roth, and repulses the insects, making him weaker. This is when he notices Sophia. He begins to explain himself to her, but she stabs him and they fall off the platform. We reach the surface just before the nuclear reactor explodes. We see a helicopter off in the distance. We use a piece of metal to create a glare, attracting the helicopter's attention, and it ends up being Sarah. We are just getting ready to be rescued when Roth appears one final time, completely ravaged. He tries to shoot Mick but hits Sarah instead, just before Hara shoots him and kills him for good. Fast forward 2 weeks and Sarah is in the hospital, unconscious, as Annie sits beside her. Sarah wakes up and assumes that Mick has left her again. Before Annie can explain, Mick appears and announces that he's staying this time. His drifting days are behind him. The end. So yeah, I tried to be as detailed and comprehensive in the synopsis as I could without getting too bogged down with bits that were more gameplay related and didn't advance the story, and I tried to be fairly objective, except for the couple intermissions. But hopefully, even from my objective recap of the story, you can see why I think it went off the rails. It was during the scene when Mick learns that he's been part of the original plan to go back in time and save his son that I understood the real reason for the sci-fi elements like phase flipping. They wanted to tell a story about accepting the past and show that Mick had grown as a character into someone who could move on from the death of his son. So they settled on time travel as a main theme to help deliver this message. I just think the game went too far out of its way to steer the plot in this direction, and ultimately ended up souring what could have been a more engaging story if it had just kept it simple and tried to show Mick's character development in some other way. I like a twist as much as the next guy, but this game feels like it keeps twisting until it's unrecognizable from the early game. First, you think Hara is the bad guy, but he's not. Then you think Holden is the bad guy, but he's not. Then you think Roth is the bad guy, which he obviously is, but for some reason everyone trusts him. And even though Mick never fully trusts him, when you learn his true motive, it feels like yet another forced twist. The only good twist was the reveal that Mick was in on the plan to go back and save his son, but it feels like one of those rare times twice a day when a broken clock is right. The game shines brightest when you're doing detective work. The game suffers in its moments of poorly executed sci-fi elements like time travel. It does make for a really cool final act though. The act where you have to purposely unalive yourself over and over to go further back in time is a clever use of dark humor, but narrative-wise, the ends don't justify the means of getting there, and the gritty conspiracy investigation vibe has been completely upended by the time you go off to the nuclear power plant. And the boss battle at the end feels out of place. If someone had showed me a clip of the final boss battle while I was still in the first hours of the game, it might have been enough to get me to stop playing. I said I'd talk more about how the story avoids giving explicit answers a lot of times, and it remains intentionally vague in order to avoid doing so. We are never given a concrete explanation as to why Mick left the facility in the first place. If we want to steelman the story, we can hypothesize. Maybe he needed to experience more high-stress situations engineered by Roth in order to get better at phase flipping, which he and Roth needed to meet their goal. But how does something like secretly poisoning an IV bag cause high stress? Maybe Roth had run out of homeless people to use as fodder to power the quantum coupler, but why let them go? Or if he had killed them or turned them into Melingi, why? Why not just keep them there like he did for his wife? There are plenty of empty rooms. Maybe he needed Mick to go and bring back Grace and Hara for a bigger phase flip, but an objective answer is never really given, so we can't say for sure. It's easy to get into the weeds trying to dissect what went wrong when you add more and more sci-fi elements to a story, and especially with time travel. I honestly think that was the last thing this story needed, but if we're going to use it, they should have fleshed out the details more instead of muddling them. They also don't explain why Roth can still dodge bullets after you've removed his ability to phase flip,
or why phase flipping only causes memory loss when it's convenient to the plot.
Or what causes the Melingi monsters or the insects to mutate in the way they did other than vague references to the genetic modification.
Or how predicting the future is the same as traveling to the past. When you hold a lens to this, they're not the same thing.
Overall, the writing is smart and involves some really complicated and intricate things ranging from nuclear power reactors to artificially enhanced genetics, but it feels like they weaponize their intelligence by creating smoke and mirrors in the form of overcomplicated science in order to avoid having to explain things in layman's terms. Because it wouldn't make sense if they did. And if I'm missing something, please let me know in the comments. In the earlier parts of the game, when it was exploring themes of destitution and being looked down on by people, and presented itself to be a grounded murder mystery with some low sci-fi elements, I really felt like I was playing something great. When Mick shows up at the funeral smelling like the sewer, and you know he had packed a suit and it wasn't supposed to be like this, and you feel everyone looking at you with disgust, and the only person who doesn't seem to judge him is his sister Annie, it's a genuinely emotionally charged moment.
This is how I know that the studio has potential to make something great if they just don't get carried away in their next game, which I will definitely buy despite this review being quite scathing at times. If you played this game and you liked it, hopefully you can at least see where I'm coming from. I hope you leave a comment so that we can try to find some common ground. I really did enjoy a lot about this game, especially early on. I don't get any pleasure from giving a negative review. I do it because I care. Please leave a comment suggesting which game I should review next, or don't. Whatever you do, stay seaworthy, friend.